Success Stories with your host, Kim Ezra Shinedown.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Success Stories, the program about people who had the guts, the skill, the persistence, and yes, maybe even the luck to take a good idea and build it into a big business. On this special edition of Success Stories, we're going to take an in-depth look at the ultimate entrepreneurial how to be a successful stand-up comic. Our guest is Tommy Moore, a professional stand-up comic who's performed on radio and TV, on cruise ships, and at comedy clubs, and who's appeared with Harry Anderson, Steve Allen, and Don Rickles. Tommy Moore also conducts corporate seminars on how to relieve stress through humor, and teaches courses at Temple University's School of Continuing Education in Philadelphia. But let's take a short break. We'll be back in a moment with more on Success Stories. Tommy, at what age did you decide you were going to be a comedian?
About age 5. Oh yeah, I was sitting on a rocking horse and I fell off and somebody laughed and I said, "Ooh, I like this attention." And I've been falling off things ever since.
So you never sort of sidetracked and said, "I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that"?
No, never for a minute. I mean, I went to college and at one time I was middle management and at one time I was a 5th grade school teacher and I did all those things to please my parents. But I did them to amass enough money so that I could quit and then be a stand-up comic and have a cushion and do what I always wanted to do.
You said earlier when we were talking before the show that you came from a Jewish-Italian family.
Oh, yeah.
Now, were they happy to hear that you were going to earn a living being a stand-up comic, or did they push you into being a doctor or a lawyer or whatever?
They liked that I was doing it. They were worried that I could never earn a living at it, because it is tough for the first 5 or 6 years. But once they saw me earning a living at it, they said, yeah, go, be, do, have fun.
That's terrific. Tommy, we were talking also earlier in the show about being a left-brained or a right-brained person, and this is, after all, a business information show, and most business people, I think, would tend to be left-brained. That's logical, sequential, and so forth. What kind of a personality are you, do you think?
No-brain person. It helps if you have no brain. If you want to be a comedian, have no brain. No, I would say I'm a right-brain person. I'm not real organized. I have to force myself to be. I guess I'm more creative, imaginative, no-brained is about it.
Well, later on in the show, we're going to ask you about the nuts and bolts of earning a living at being a stand-up comic, and we'll talk about how being disorganized and creative and so forth, aesthetic, can help you or hurt you trying to do that. But for now, I just want to ask you, Tommy, how do you know if something's funny and something's not? Is it possible to analyze what's funny and what's not?
Nope. The only way to do it is if the people laugh, it's funny. See, funny is not definitive. What's funny to one person is not funny to another. So what you've got to do is analyze your crowd. Take a look at their values, who they are, and then you can figure out what they think is funny, and then you give it to them.
Really? But it's not possible to analyze humor?
You can analyze it, but you can't put money down and say this will make any crowd, anytime, anywhere laugh, because it won't. Older people laugh at different things than younger people. Different status people laugh at different things, different ways.
Well, it sounds to me as if you have to be incredibly intuitive in terms of tuning in to people.
Either that or experienced. You have to be able to look at people and size them up right away. It's much like being a salesman.
I hate to ask, but looking at me, right here early in the morning, I mean, what kind of humor do you think I'd laugh at?
Well, I would say that you would laugh at pretty much middle-of-the-road material, whereas, for instance, if you were a 17-year-old and didn't have a lot of life experience,
okay,
I had better talk about dating and school and those kind of things, okay? Whereas if you were 90 years old, I had better talk about the problems of a senior citizen. If you're right in there in the middle with the rest of us, I could probably talk about marriage and mortgages and bills and doctors and nurses and all those kind of things that we deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, that is exactly, especially the bill part that you just mentioned, is the kind of thing that I deal with. Tommy, I've watched some excellent stand-up comedy from 2 very famous comedians in Greenwich Village when they were just starting, and one was Richard Pryor.
Oh, yeah.
And the other one was a comedian called David Steinberg.
Sure.
Now, they made any good comic, really good comic, can just make it look so easy.
That's the trick of it.
That's the trick of it. But do you think anybody can learn to be a successful stand-up comic?
I don't think so. No, I think you've got to, first of all, have a sense of the ridiculous about you. You have to want to be funny. Second, you've got to have a real thick skin. Because in the beginning, you are going to fail a lot. And the terminology for fail as a comedian is bomb. And you're going to bomb miserably in the beginning because you don't know what you're doing yet. Once you learn what you're doing, learn how to do it, get comfortable with it, then you remain constant. But the audience is still the variable. And what I was saying was that different audiences will laugh different ways, different nights. And the same joke can do tremendously well one night and bomb the next night.
It's not, of course, very easy to tell jokes to a crowd of people. I think timing would be very important.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Timing is essential just in communicating. You've got to get the point across as quickly as possible, otherwise you lose a crowd.
Okay, let's take a short break. We'll be back in a moment with more on success stories. You're listening to Success Stories, and my guest today is professional stand-up comic Tommy Moore, here to tell us how to become a successful stand-up comic. Tommy, are there different styles of humor? You've talked initially about ages, that you have to marry your comedic style to the audience in terms of their life experience. But are there different styles of comedy?
Oh, sure. There are dozens of different styles. There are standard joke tellers who just come out and do jokes, like Henny Youngman. There are one-liner comedians. There are insult comedians. There are prop comedians. There are comedians who employ another talent, whether it's playing an instrument, as does Victor Borge, or doing magic, as does Harry Anderson. There are impressionists. There are comedy actors. There are dozens of comedy styles.
What's your style?
I do a lot of audience participation. What I am, back in the Catskills in the old days, there used to be a term called a tumler. A tumler was someone who made tumult, who got into a crowd and had fun with them. That's basically what I do. I go up, I do a lot of jokes, I get into the audience, I get them on stage, I have a party. My show is more a party than a performance.
Okay, well, talking about a party, what about the old style of a vaudeville comic? What is that? I've heard about vaudeville comedy, but is that what you...
It's a little bit of what I do, yeah. Vaudeville comedy was very broad, usually somewhat slapstick. People like W.C. Fields, Ed Wynn. Usually they wore outlandish costumes, which in fact I do. On stage I always wear a big red jacket and a white hat, only because it makes me look different and look funny, and they know from the minute I walk in the room that I'm there to be funny. As opposed to someone like a David Steinberg, who could walk into a room and you could say he might be a lawyer, he might be an accountant. When I walk into a room, you know I'm a comedian.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, is do you have to look funny to be a comedian?
You know, you don't have to do anything other than be comfortable with what you're doing. If you want to look like a lawyer and you're comfortable with that, you can be very funny looking like a lawyer. If you want to look like a clown and you're comfortable with that, you can make people laugh looking like a clown. You've got to be true to who you are, first and foremost. And if you try to do anything other, you're going to look uncomfortable.
You mentioned slapstick a while ago. Why I've never found slapstick comedy to be particularly funny, so why do other people find it funny? Is it the sense of the ridiculous you were talking about?
I think it's part of that. I think that people like to see other people fail, slip on a banana peel, as long as they don't get hurt. Nobody laughs. If I slip on a banana peel and break my leg, nobody laughs. But if I slip on a banana peel and just hit my bottom, people tend to laugh. They like to know that people other than them do foolish things. Because we all know we all do foolish things. And when we see somebody else do something foolish, we're relieved like, oh, I'm not the only idiot in the world.
Well, you're right. I guess that is the funny part of being on slapstick comedy. But here's another question, Tommy. Are there different cultural styles of comedy? I mean, is there a British style of comedy that's very different from the American style? Is it possible to analyze that far?
Yeah, from what I know, British-style comedy, especially the old music hall comedy, was very broad.
It's very bawdy. You talk about broad. It's also very bawdy.
I mean, Benny Hill and all of those people, very almost burlesque-style comedy, very bawdy. Now, from what I understand, Russian comedy is, or at least has been, very political. They enjoy, or did enjoy, back in the old days of 4 years ago, taking jabs at the party. That was always very much fun. So different cultures, do have different senses of humor.
Well, having been brought up in England, I would just like to quickly mention another style that you didn't mention, aside from the real bawdy Benny Hill kind, is that ironic, understated kind of humor, which I find just absolutely hysterical. And I guess John Cleese, in some of his moments, would be like that. But I don't know if Americans are familiar with John Gielgud, but he was the old geezer in the Arthur movies.
Sure.
But that's very understated, sort of one-line put-down almost. I would imagine that's very, very hard to do, but I would imagine that most Americans probably don't find that very funny.
They find it funny if they're sitting and they have the attention span to really take it all in. But if you're in a nightclub and there's a lot of nonsense going on and a lot of noise, it's got to be bawdier and louder and faster.
Oh, I see. So it's a question also of the audience size.
Oh, sure.
Oh, I get it. Okay. Woody Allen, where would Woody Allen fit in? And what kind of comic style is his?
I think he's real narrative, very introspective. He's telling you his views on the world.
An intellectual sort of comic,
Sure.
would you say? Okay. Let's get down to some real serious business here now.
Okay.
The show is called How to Be a Successful Stand-Up Comic. Let's say someone came to you and they said, I think I'm funny, Tommy, but how do I go about getting my material together? You mentioned before about looking inside, that the words in comedy are me. Is that what you tell them?
Yeah, and to keep on asking the question why. Just like a little kid keeps saying, why daddy, why daddy, why daddy? Keep saying, why is this funny? Why is this funny? Why is, for instance, waking up in the morning. Now, there doesn't seem to be anything intrinsically funny about that, but if you keep on asking that question why is that funny? Okay? When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you hear on the radio? What was the song? Did it put you in a good mood? Is that funny? How about when you get out of bed? What condition are you in? Do you have a hangover? Is that funny? Why do you have a hangover? What did you do the night before that gave you the hangover? Is that funny? When you go into the bathroom and look in the mirror, look at what you see in the morning. Is that funny? Keep on asking what is funny, and you snowball a routine out of just asking why.
That's very insightful. I think also you probably have to be very aware of everything that's going on around you,
absolutely.
and that everybody has experiences that they can turn into comedy. Would you agree with that?
Sure. I mean, Bill Cosby does just good old Mankind in Review. It's the things that we all do every day with our kids, with our family, and we can all identify with it. It's identification comedy.
Is it helpful to observe other comics like Bill Cosby to hone your style?
Sure. I tell people, watch every comedian you can, good or bad, because you're going to learn from them. You're going to learn what to do and what not to do. That's why if you go to comedy clubs on their open stage nights, you will see lots of bad comedians. Great. Learn from them. Better to learn from their mistakes than to go up and make your own. You'll see a lot of mistakes being made by amateur comedians. Study those mistakes.
Can you just give us an example of one mistake? Obviously, the big mistake would be that people didn't laugh, but why would someone not laugh? Would it be bad timing? Would it be what would exactly would be?
Here's an obvious mistake. One of the things I always tell people is whenever and if ever possible, get yourself videotaped so you can see what you are or aren't doing. One comedian, for instance, every time he told a joke, because he was afraid of looking at the people and getting or not getting a response, at the end of the punchline, he would immediately look at his shoes. He would avoid eye contact. Now, that's kind of a knee-jerk reaction that you don't realize that you're doing, but after you've done it 4 or 5 times, audiences sense that you're timid about getting a laugh. So obviously, not making eye contact is a very bad mistake, because you're supposed to be communicating with people, not talking to your shoes.
Which, oddly enough, we did a show a little while back on how to impress an audience, and that was the first rule, is make eye contact.
Sure.
So that would tend to reduce, well, however funny the thing was, it just would tend to reduce the fact that people didn't see you as very confident and rather timid. What else would be a mistake? A common mistake that most neophyte comedians would make?
A common mistake is not having fun with your routine. Half the word funny is fun. You'll see a lot of comedians go up there and look worried that the next joke may or may not get a laugh, or be very arrogant about the fact that these are my thoughts, listen to me, expounding about, and they're not having fun. They're either too nervous or too arrogant, and you're not seeing a person have fun up there. Well, if the comedian is not having fun, how can the audience have fun?
Well, who are your favorite comics?
Favorite comics, Shecky Green, Danny Thomas, God rest his soul, just passed away, Buddy Hackett, Don Rickles, Bill Cosby, Red Skelton.
I agree with you, certainly about Don Rickles. He just happens to really break me up. He is so funny. But the thing is, he's so rude. I think what makes him so funny is he's so unbelievably rude. But how can he get away with being so rude? And why is it funny that he's so rude? I mean, if you or I got up in front of an audience and insulted them the way he does, I mean, we just might get punched out.
And as a matter of fact, in the beginning of his career, he did a lot. Because people didn't know who he was, didn't come in expecting to see that. Now they know what he's going to do, and they accept it. It's kind of like maybe you've got an uncle who talks very bawdy, and your uncle can get away with that because everybody knows that's Uncle Lou, and he's probably going to say something very bawdy. Whereas if you met somebody for the first time, and they were real bawdy, you might say, ooh, how rude.
Right. So Don Rickles is just able to people just know that that's going to be Don Rickles.
Because they know it's him.
He also has this impish smile, I must say, that after every disgusting, rude comment, he makes this little smile, and so you know that it's meant to be funny.
Sure.
So the comedian can give the cues to the audience, perhaps.
Oh, absolutely. There's one thing that I used to do just for fun. Like I said, I wear a hat. In the beginning of my act, every time I do a punchline, I'll touch the hat. And they'll laugh. Now the audience is conditioned that every time I touch my hat, I must have said something funny. So just in the middle of my act for no reason, I'll touch my hat without having said anything funny, and 9 times out of 10, they will laugh.
That's hysterical. Okay, let's take a short break. We'll be back in a moment with more on Success Stories. You're listening to Success Stories, and my guest on this edition is professional stand-up comic Tommy Moore, who also teaches courses at Temple University in Philadelphia on how to be a successful stand-up comic. Tommy, I want to ask you some kind of personal questions.
Sure.
Have you ever gone into your job, which is to be a stand-up comic, not feeling very funny? I mean, maybe something terrible happened. How do you deal with that? I mean, do you always have to be up or what?
The show will put you up. If you enjoy what you're doing, and I love it, you will forget about everything else the minute you walk on stage. One thing that I hadn't planned on talking about, but since you brought it up, my dad was dying of cancer, and I was playing at my old school. They asked me to come and do a show. And he was supposed to have been in the audience, but he was very sick and couldn't make it. And that was one of the first nights he didn't see me. And I would have liked to have seen him be in the audience at my old school, etc., etc. As I was standing backstage, I was crying, literally crying. When they announced me, I walked on. I did an hour of comedy, had fun, had a ball. And the minute I hit backstage and walked down the steps, I started crying again. But for that hour that I was on stage, not only did I feel better because I was having a ball doing comedy, but they never knew. That's what comedy can do for you. One of the things when I talk about stress is that when you're doing comedy and when you're having fun, it's like a vacation from all your problems.
That's right. It is like a vacation from all your problems. Tommy, here's another question, because after all, this is a show where we're trying to give people some information on how to actually do this, but let's say that I wanted to be a stand-up comic. God forbid that I would, but let's say that I did. How does one go about doing it professionally? What's the first step you take? Do you go to a comedy club? Do you go to an agent? I mean, what do you do from a business point of view? Even though you, as you said, you're right brain, but what do you do?
Okay, first thing, go to every comedy club you can. Watch all the stand-up comedy you can. Second thing, videotape all the comedians you can on TV and watch them over and over and over again for timing and pacing and how to write material. Then the next thing is put together 10 minutes of good material that you're comfortable with and that fits your personality, okay? And then after you've got that good, strong 10 minutes that you're rehearsed on, that you're comfortable with, that you can do in your sleep.
Who do you rehearse it in front of? The mirror? Your
family? Whether it's the mirror, whether it's your family, whether it's a little portable micro cassette tape recorder, listen to it over and over. Improve every line. How
do you get to remember? I mean, comedians must have a fantastic memory. How do you remember this material?
I think it's a matter of caring. You know how when you meet people you like, you remember their names a lot more easily than people you don't like? I think it's a matter of caring about it. You have to care enough to remember. Also, if you sang the song Happy Birthday, are we allowed to sing it right now?
Happy birthday to you.
Okay, now, how did you remember that?
I've said it so many times.
That's
Practice.
number one, practice. Number two is you heard the rhythm of the song. You hear the rhythm of a joke, much like a song.
If you're right-brained, you do.
Okay? So you hear the rhythm, you've done the practice, and you will remember it. So then after you've got your 10 minutes of material, now you go back to the comedy clubs, but this time to get on stage, on an open stage night. And usually you'll be given 5 minutes to stand up and get your feet wet. After a while, the 5 minutes turns into 10, turns into 15, and now, if you're good, you'll go to the club owner and say, can I come back on a weekend for a paid position? And that's the springboard. Once you've got that weekend shot and you've got 15 or 20 minutes of material, then you go about doing things like getting pictures, getting a resume, going to agents, going to managers.
Okay, so you've given us a sequence.
Pretty much.
Which is, okay. Well, you did mention the word money, and we're kind of running out of time, but
Okay.
paid. What kind of pay?
Okay, the first thing I tell people, comedy is a great hobby. It's a good way to make an extra $5,000-6,000 a year. It's a horrible way to pay the mortgage. In the first 5 or 6 years, you're not going to make more than a few $1,000s a year, because most comedy club comics are making anywhere between $50 to $200 a show. When you get proficient and you've got a lot of material and your name is pretty well known, then you can make a real good living at this.
We talked about luck at the beginning of the show, and in every enterprise there's an element of luck. Some people have gotten really big breaks. We can name them, Jay Leno, Arsenio Hall, and so forth. What can a professional stand-up comic do to get those breaks, which some people, like Steve Martin, we can go on, have had wonderful breaks. What can you do from a business-type point of view to make sure those breaks come your way?
Just be there. Be as many places, as many times as you can. Perform everywhere you can. You never know who might be out there to see you and give you that break.
Are you glad that you became a professional stand-up comic as your livelihood?
Would never do anything else. I thank God every day that I can have fun at my job.
Okay, let's take a short break. We'll be back in a moment with more on Success Stories. We've reached the end of another edition of Success Stories. Thanks to my guest, Tommy Moore, for joining me today to discuss how to become a successful stand-up comic.
Thank you.
Thanks also to engineer Ron Barron and director Kingsley Smith. Success Stories has been recorded at the studios of WHYY-FM in Philadelphia. I'm Kim Ezra Scheinbaum, wishing you success.